welcome to the Still Becoming podcast, where we talk about things that are important for dudes who want to get their shit together and are tired of Jordan Peterson and Joe Rogan and all these quote unquote influencers. The topic for today is therapy. Jacob and I have both done therapy. For some reason, it seems like it's like a magic bullet. If you're having a bad relationship or you're having issues in life or you have mental health, depression, anxiety, if you go to therapy, you'll get your stuff fixed right away, or go to therapy for a couple years and then you'll come out the other side and you'll be a changed man. There's a lot of benefits to therapy, and I think there's also some downsides in some areas that aren't really talked about because there's a lot of good PR for therapy. And so the goal of this podcast is to dive into our experiences, what we found work, what we found not work, and ultimately what actually helps us on our journeys to becoming better. Jacob, what's your experience getting therapized been?
I think therapy is a great place for people to start when it comes to improving their mental health. I just don't think it's the only place for improving your mental health. I think it brings a lot to the surface and builds up a lot of awareness, but it's a tricky one because awareness is helpful and useful. And yes, to a degree, that might change your actions. But ultimately, what scares me about therapy is ultimately you're the person that's going to need to live with yourself in every moment of every single day. And there's been times in the past where I felt I needed to talk to my therapist all of the time because I couldn't function and cope within myself. And that is a really scary place to be because therapists are overworked, they're underpaid, and they might be able to talk to you once a week for half an hour. And they're obviously notoriously expensive for many people.
Yeah.
And so the fact that you're just going to wait and sometimes be passive once a week to hope that you can fix your mental health in just half an hour once a week is a tricky one. I think my take on it is it's a great place to start. It's definitely, to me, it feels like a net positive, not a net negative. But I don't think it should be the only thing in someone's arsenal to improve their mental health.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. Main takeaway there is you need a variety of approaches, not just necessarily therapy, and you need autonomy as well. You need to be able to make your own decisions.
What's your
My
take?
my screen just froze, so I'm not sure if
Same.
I wonder if my Wi-Fi really bad.
Now it's
Okay,
back.
I'm back. Yeah, nice buffering. Yeah, my take on therapy. Yeah, I my own experience was a lot of ups and downs with therapy. So my first exposure to therapy was in a family therapy session with my mom and the therapist and myself. And due to the setup and the dynamics in that, I didn't have a particularly positive experience because it was largely my mom complaining about me to the therapist listening and then asking me why I was such a bad child, essentially, or like why I wouldn't listen to my mom. It was two versus one situation, and that wasn't great.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't, and yeah, there were a lot of family dynamics at play there that weren't particularly helpful. So my experience with family therapy is that it's not. And also the thing is like you're paying the therapist, or
Yeah.
whoever's paying the therapist has like an unfair leverage in the situation because the therapist wanted. So either one of two things could have happened in this particular situation, and this might be a niche case, so maybe it's probably not relevant to a lot of people. But
Yeah.
either like the therapist wants to continue getting paid, and so the therapist will just agree with whoever's paying them, or the
Yeah.
therapist was genuinely bad and
Yeah.
just didn't know how to deal with complex family dynamics, which this was supposed to be like a family
Yeah.
counselor. So it was just like a
Yeah.
really bad situation. So that was my first exposure. My second therapy experience was finding therapy for myself or trying to find my own therapist. And there were a couple that I tried out, and I was like, I'm not Sometimes you just don't click, you just don't vibe. And there was one that I stuck with for a year, and they were okay. It just ended up being a lot of just tell me about your experiences, tell me about your trauma. And so there was a lot of unearthing, a lot of uncovering. But at the end of the day, it didn't change anything, really.
Mm.
If anything, I feel like it might have made things worse because I think it made me feel like more of a victim because I was
Mm.
talking about all of these traumatic things that happened and being let down by my family and having these really negative experiences. And there
Yeah.
wasn't really a lot of, and here's what you can do. What they, in that session, what they recommended was this thing called EMDR, which is like bilateral stimulation where you hold like these buzzing paddles of sorts and they like buzz here like that. It's kind of like a phone that's like buzzing. And you like go and recreate a really negative experience you have and you're supposed to integrate it. I did that several times. I don't feel like it did
Mm.
anything for me. I know some people have said that's really powerful for them. It didn't seem to do much for me. And so I ended up paying
Yeah.
like $4,000 over the course of like a year, basically. And I don't feel like it significantly changed much for me, mostly because it just felt like it reinforced an identity that I was missing a lot in my
Mm.
childhood, and it wasn't like, and here's how you put it back the pieces together, and here's how you can like live a better
Yeah.
life now, and here's what you can do. It's just let's remember all the terrible things that happened to you, and then let's hold a paddle and get buzzed as
Yeah.
you're re-experiencing those things every week or every other week. But yeah, there's a counter argument where it's like maybe I wasn't doing the thing, and I think that you also touched on that of you have to integrate. That 30 minutes is like the huddle, pre-game huddle or
Yeah.
whatever, and then it's like the rest of the week is the game. And so I
Yes.
think you could definitely make the
Yes.
argument that and part of it is that I wasn't given the tools really, and maybe that's not what the therapy is supposed to be about, but I didn't learn how to live life in between the therapy. I think therapy can make
Yeah.
you, and you're mentioning this too, is that it can make you
Yes.
dependent on it, where it's like, oh, what am I need to
Yes.
talk to my therapist. Like, I can't think about this thing until I talk to the therapy person, and I don't know. So there's kind of like a dependency and kind of like a victimization that I personally, and it wasn't intentional. They never said, "Oh, you're such a victim" or whatever. But I guess
Yeah.
just passively, just rehashing the negative stuff over and over again, I felt like it when I started identifying with that.
Yeah. I think there's a couple interesting things there. The first is we assume that therapists are like saints
Mm.
in our culture a bit, but at the end of the day, they are just people. And at the end of the day, we are all just people, which means that yes, there can be plenty of good therapists, but there can also be plenty of bad therapists as well. And so one person's experience of therapy might be very different from another person's experience of therapy. A good example that comes to mind is like couples counseling, right? Maybe you're doing a couples counseling situation and the counselor is just like attacking one side versus the other, or they're not being objective. And that's really tough. I think the second thing that's weird with therapy is that I think it's part of their kind of legal or ethical code of conduct, but they're not actually able to tell you what to do, which is interesting because it basically means that what you're doing with therapy then is just building an awareness of your problems, but they're not going to tell you you should break up with your girlfriend. They're not going to tell you maybe you should stop hanging out with that friend. They're not going to tell you, okay, maybe you shouldn't use that explicit website that I don't need to name for obvious reasons. Like, that's one thing that's interesting to me. And I think, yeah, to me, that the most interesting thing about therapy is what do you do when your therapist isn't around? Because your therapist is only around once a week. And then someone might argue and say, oh, the whole purpose of it is to build your awareness such that you can better cope throughout the rest of the week. And that's valid. But ultimately, if you have a solution that's only going to be helpful for half an hour a week, so I think my take is that it's not that it's not helpful, it's just I don't think it's the full story. And a lot of people do. I get the sense that a lot of people think, hey, if I go to therapy, that's enough for me to improve my mental health. And that's, to me personally, I don't believe that's the case. The other thing I'll say about this topic is, for me, myself personally, I could sometimes use therapy as an excuse to not actually confront my darker emotions and inner shadow and do the work. In the sense that if I speak to a therapist and I talk around the topics, I don't actually need to feel them. And anyone that has successfully, we use that word emotional integration a lot, but anyone that has quote unquote successfully integrated is someone that has been able to confront the darker side of their shadow, to confront the negative emotions, to feel the trauma of the past, etc., etc. And that takes a lot of courage, and that's not easy to do. But for me, sometimes I felt like I was using therapy, sometimes at least, as an excuse to not feel, to not do those, or to not go deeper, and to just talk around the issues and talk around the problems. And yes, therapy will help bring awareness surrounding these problems, surrounding your childhood trauma, etc., all these things. But I still, to an extent, believe that you still need to confront the storm.
Yeah.
And that a therapist can help you, but by definition, they can't do it for you. And so the real question then becomes, how do you confront your shadow? And I think ultimately that's up to the individual to solve for.
Yeah. I think one of the big things you called out there was the using therapy as an excuse not to do the work, and that's definitely something that I've encountered as well, where it feels like you're moving forward, like being in the therapy sessions, I'm talking about these problems and I'm really getting to the root of things, and then when I go back, I'm just going to wait for next week to then talk about the same things and not really get any progress. And like you said, the therapist, I need to look and see if this actually is a thing, but what you said about the therapist not being able to tell you what to do. I've never had a therapist say, oh, you should do this or you shouldn't do that, which I think it's a double-edged sword.
Exactly.
That could really be misused if you have a bad actor therapist who tells you to do some stuff that's really not great, and then you're like, my therapist said to do it. And then the flip side of that is that there's a lack of accountability or lack of direction in a certain sense too, because you're just kind of left to your own devices to a certain extent. You're like, here's a whole bunch of information, hope you make the right decision. It's like walking into like a giant kitchen of all this like ingredients and stuff with no recipe, and it's like, time to make a meal now. I don't know how to cook. That's what you're
exactly. I think therapy is good because it helps you reflect on the past and helps you reflect on why you've become who you are. But that doesn't change the fact that, to an extent, within reason, all else equal, you choose who you are in the present moment. And so I think when I think of therapy to a degree, I have this mindset of then what? Okay, you had an attachment issue in your past, you were anxiously attached, you were avoidant attached, whatever. Mom did this, dad did this. It sucks, right? Then what are you going to do about it? Because I think the big challenge for me with therapy becomes sometimes it doesn't feel like it's very action oriented. And for me personally, I want to take actions. So for example, something that has helped my mental health a lot is doing morning affirmations. because I wake up first thing, and the first thing, that my mind thinks of is I'm forcing my brain to think more positively, and I'm forcing my synapses to change. And I think something that's very interesting about therapy, and I'm curious on your thoughts on this, is the more you use your synapses, the stronger they become. So if you just keep talking about negative things, does that make the negative things more strong? Does that make those connections of negativity stronger in your brain? Maybe not. Now, yes, you've got to unpack your trauma, you've got to look at your shadow, all these things. But I feel like sometimes, and honestly, I'd say a lot of this is dependent on how good the therapist is. Not every therapist is good. And so you need to be careful with who you work with, because if you work with a bad therapist, maybe they just bring up the negative even more, and then that just makes you feel more negative. Now, granted, maybe you do need to confront some of the negative emotions in order to release them and let them go. However, the biggest challenge for me with therapy has been action. And what are you actually going to do? You build the awareness, you get all this new information, you figure out why you are the way that you are. Okay, great. What are you going to do about it? And instead of just talking about these shallow things of, hey, my girlfriend did this and this and this and this bad thing every single week, try and go a level deeper. And going a level deeper does take a little bit of courage. That courage is what a therapist should help you do in the first place, by definition, is help give you the courage to confront those negative emotions. But they shouldn't just let you stay in those negative emotions.
Yeah, 100%. That is a good point on the talking about focusing on negativity versus at what point do you stop focusing on the negative or refocus? Like if you're spending 100% of your time in negative, just here's all the traumatic stuff, there's not going to be any progress. And if you spend 0% looking at the negative, you're not going to learn, and you might be held back by blind spots by rehashing the same stuff over and over again because you're not learning. And so there is like a sweet spot, I feel like, of, and a lot of times with therapy, I feel like it's more skewed towards just rehashing as opposed to what's the actual output for it, for sure. But I like you were also touching on what's actually moving the needle, and its action, really. And one specific action is the morning affirmation. I know.
What are some actions that have helped you personally?
Yeah, so I know for myself, I was thinking the paleo diet was a big thing, and the keto diet, and like trying to eat like our ancestors. The deal is the whole paleo diet idea of meat and unprocessed stuff. I feel like the paleo diet is needed for mental health these days. What I mean by that, what?
How come, sorry?
Oh, not like the paleo diet specifically, but a paleo-like approach to mental health. Sorry. Yeah, I was just thinking about this today. And it's the idea of what are we doing today that our ancestors were not doing, and vice versa, what were our ancestors doing that we're not doing? And one thing that comes to mind is like being in a room staring at a screen is not a natural behavior. It's not a evolved behavior that we've learned to do over years and years. Back in the day, like you were more forced to be around people, and there's always been people who are like super introverted and just like hermits, basically. That's never not been a thing. But I feel like it's really easy to do things that don't seem like a big deal that have a huge toll, negative effect on overall mental health, at least for me. And it's way easier to be isolated, right? Like back in the day, you had to go to the store to get food, or you had to farm your own food. You had to talk with people. And there's just less and less reason for people to be connected with each other these days. And so the whole paleo, like ancestral, whatever approach is I need to incorporate this stuff into my day to day. Like I have to be intentional about what I need to be connected with people. I need to be
Yeah.
out of the house, getting sunlight, all stuff that seems like that our ancestors truly did take for granted because there was no other way to do it. Like you couldn't just sit in
Yeah.
your house all day. Like it just
Yeah.
the whole COVID lockdown thing couldn't have happened basically. Like you had to still go out and do shit. And so I guess bringing that back to like, what do I do tangibly, staying connected with people, like making that is like just as important. Say you have like antidepressants or something, or you have some sort of medication that you have to take. I view like being connected to people is that is medication that is
Yeah.
important.
Yeah.
Fitness, exercise is equally important. If I'm not
Yeah.
moving, if I'm not active, it's a great way to release cortisol. Like I'm pretty sure like cortisol goes out through your sweat. That's what I've heard. So it's like, if you are sweating, it's like you're able to like flush that cortisol more quickly.
Yeah.
And that was an example I noticed yesterday where I was like having a moment where I was like, I'm just getting super stressed out. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to go exercise, lift weights, and do some boxing work and sweat a lot, especially on the boxing, lots of cardio and punching and moving around and
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
And massive improvement in my stress levels. And I think therapy focuses a lot on mental stuff. Oh, you have to cognitively reframe how you think of things, and you want to use these like cognitive behavioral techniques in your mind to think of positive stuff. And for me, I feel like physical, like like we're saying, like action, physical things, being
Yeah.
in the world and getting yourself outside, like going for a walk, is highly restorative. All of those things are super useful. And I feel like because they're so boring and non-sexy and not like psychologic, like very, it's not like a deep technique, psychological technique. It's those little things
Yeah.
deployed over time consistently that are the most effective. Like it's dumb
Yeah.
stuff that isn't
Yeah.
walking, dumb,
Yeah.
exercise, like all that stuff. It's nothing crazy, but when it's all put together, it has this massive uplifting effect. So those are just kind of like a handful.
Yeah. Yeah, those are really interesting points. And I think to add a couple of thoughts to add to that. I think the first is we live in an age where we get connection through our screens rather than connection with real people in real life. And no one really talks about that enough. And that is actually quite scary, right? People get like their sexual needs filled with a screen now, at least most men do.
Yeah.
Instead of being involved in their community and like going out on the weekends and having activities where they meet people and whatnot, people listen to podcasts and they look at influencers on social media. And so they're getting these artificial forms of connection. And that's not to say that those don't hold value and whatnot, but to your point, people are meant to feel part of a community. And I think the reason why men's groups are so empowering for guys is because a lot of young men don't feel like they have a community. They don't feel like they have a place where they can talk among friends and be a human being. And I think social media, in some sense, has made us almost a little bit robotic in the sense that we just engage entertainment a lot rather than connect as human beings. I think the second thing is I think to only mental health in mental health is a big umbrella term. And I think therapy and understanding the ideas and whatnot is helpful. But I don't think enough people talk about the idea that mental health can be tied to a physiological state. For example, if I have a bad night's sleep, without fail, I will have a low mood, without fail. And it's very easy to think like, maybe it's because of the thing that maybe it's this person said this thing today at work or whatever. But ultimately, mental health is so tied to your physiology, right? To your point, sweating, eating whole nutritious foods, sleeping, like really nailing the basics. And that nailing the basics is something that Chris Williamson talks a lot about on his podcast, Modern Wisdom, of like how to deal with stress. And people talk about that a lot as a concept, and it can be annoying and it can sound oversimplified and whatnot, but there is a lot of truth to that. If it has worked for thousands of years, there's a decent chance it works now. And so just making sure that you're nailing those basics, but B, build a journal, right? If you have a low mood, if you have a low mood or a high mood, make a mental note of that and try and figure out why you had that mood. Was it the activity you did? Was it the fact that you did or didn't do something? The more that you can try and be intentional and try and identify the patterns of what causes high mood, low mood, the better you're going to feel. And so it's very easy to just talk about the new problems in the present moment. But if you really put pen to paper and try and figure out, like, when was I most happy in my life? Or what made me happy today? Or what are the patterns where, if I'm feeling low, have happened? Just really thinking about mental health intentionally, I think, goes a long way. And then the only other final thing I'd say too is, on a similar note to how not enough people talk about the physiology of mental health, breathwork is a big part of that too, right? But I don't think enough people talk about how spirituality is a key part of mental health as well, right? Maybe the reason that you feel depressed is you don't feel like you have a relationship with spirituality. You don't need to believe in God. You can be an atheist. You can be whatever you want to be, and you can believe whatever you want to believe. But I feel like spirituality is such a key part to the human experience. And if you don't have spirituality in your life, it's very easy to just feel like a zombie going through the motions. And so trying to figure out, how can I improve and increase my spirituality in my spiritual life? That has something that's helped me a lot as well. That could be meditation. That could be going on a walk in nature. That could be a gazillion different, that could be your work, right? People talk a lot about this idea of purpose. And I think at its core, purpose is just have a relationship with your spiritual self. But I think the thing that's interesting about therapy is it's not that it doesn't work. I mean, the degree to which it works is based on how good the therapist is. I think the bigger conversation, though, is that therapy is not the only part of mental health, and there's other parts to it as well. And so if you're not looking and addressing those parts and only using one method to help you with your mental health, you could be doing yourself a disservice.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, that's pretty powerful. The mind, body, spirit connection, the trifecta there,
Yep,
is pretty critical. And I also resonate with the tracking. That like that example yesterday was like tracking those highs and lows. Any kind of,
yeah,
when there is some sort of breakdown or some sort of negative situation, one of the best things you can do practically in that is to record it somewhere, write it down. And so then you can, when you're less charged or there's less of a, I don't know, dire situation, you can look back and think, what were the factors that brought me here?
because that's the thing too, is that people throw around this term a lot of action alleviates anxiety. In some ways, therapy can make you more anxious because it builds more awareness. And
Yeah.
so then, in some sense, you want to take more action. I think it's interesting with therapy because, again, it's not that it's not helpful. I just don't think it's the only thing when it comes to people's mental health, and there's more to it than just that. I also think too, I think it's easy for guys to view their partner as a form of spiritual enlightenment because they didn't grow up with emotional intelligence quotient, etc. And so instead of looking to other people to fulfill your spiritual needs, trying to figure out if you can fill those within yourself and then come to your relationship and whatnot and come from a place of giving, as opposed to my partner is the thing that boosts my mental health because they are my form of spirituality in my life, and my partner is the way that I connect to the deeper part of my soul. If you can figure out how to connect with the deeper part of your soul through just yourself, I think that's where you start to really unlock your mental health a bit more. And to me, that's why the thing that has helped my mental health a lot is just figuring out my values and living intentionally and living in accordance with those values. It's today everyone's throwing around an opinion of this, you should do this thing or you shouldn't do this thing, or people are framing things as very kind of black and white. And in reality, I'd say it's your life. You do with it whatever you please and choose, but don't do it by living like a zombie, right? If you love Netflix, use Netflix intentionally. Don't use it like you're a zombie and you're just trying to find time to kill, right? I think people talk a lot about this concept of doom scrolling. Don't doom scroll your life, right? If your life isn't energetic, exciting, entertaining, I'm not sure the extent to which a therapist is going to help you with that. What's going to help you with that is joining new activities, finding a creative outlet, learning a musical instrument, like just objectively adding more to your life circumstances. And yes, that varies for different people. That, is based on privilege and the amount of access to resources and freedom and etc. that you have. But again, all else equal, I just think it's really important to live intentionally. And at the end of the day, yes, the therapist can help you figure out what that means. Hopefully that's what therapists aspire to do. But ultimately, it's not their responsibility, it's yours.
Yeah, that extreme ownership idea is, yeah.
And when people talk about that idea of extreme ownership, they think about it in, probably because of Jocko Willink, they think about it in this like very stoic, aggressive, masculine way. And it doesn't need to be that. I think for me, the way that I frame that is self-compassion, in a sense of you only have one life to live. And without being too corny and wishy-washy, you want to treat yourself like your best friend. Treat yourself well. Like people use the phrase like water the plant, like just, live intentionally. And I think using Chris Williamson as an example, what I like about him is that he's able to hold space for these two worlds of like self-compassion on the one hand and hustle culture on the other end. Like the thing I like about Chris Williamson is that he's able to interview people like Alex Hormozy that just work flat out all the time, but then also interview someone like Alain de Botton from the School of Life that takes on kind of more the emotional side of things and holds space for both of those, right? I think the key to mental health in some sense is like you need to have both. If you're fully emotions and no action, then maybe nothing's going to change. If you're all action and no emotions, maybe things feel empty, or you hit burnout, or you spend all of your time working, but then don't smell the roses. And hey, maybe work for you is smelling the roses. That's not for me to say, but the world has so much to give. And it's interesting how today we have more than we've ever had in history, and yet people are more depressed. And maybe that's just because people have an overwhelm of choice. Maybe it's because people's dopamine has been so fried that they don't know how to live intentionally anymore. But the biggest thing is just don't live your life like a zombie. And sometimes in the past with my therapy, I've used therapy through the lens of me being a zombie of, oh, I show up, I go through the motions, but I don't actually make any meaningful progress. I think living intentionally is so key. And to me, that's why therapy is not the only solution, because therapy can't do the living intentionally for you. Only you can do that. And that's hard and that takes courage. And the more support that you can have in that process, the better, obviously. Therapy does not equal living intentionally. Those are two different things.
It is different for each person, and I feel like that's part of why it's harder to live intentionally is that what you living intentionally looks like is not going to be the same as what me living intentionally looks like. And especially where a lot of what we do is influenced by looking at what other people are doing online and everyone has an opinion, it can be really easy to go down a route just because other people have said, oh, this is what intentional living looks like. You should be doing this. If you're not doing this, you're not doing breath work, you're not living or whatever. Not that breath work's bad. Everyone's got that. And that I feel like is the harder, at least for me, is the harder challenge.
I also think too, like, not enough people talk about how influencers make a living off of monetizing your loneliness. Like, no matter what the niche is, in some sense, like a lot of influencers make money off of monetizing your loneliness and your inner shame, right? Think about how many of these make money guys online all say the same thing. And they're all like, they almost all condition you to feel ashamed of yourself. Now, to what extent you're successful or whatnot is up to the individual to decide. But particularly with social media now, everyone is selling a narrative. And so if you don't have an awareness of that and you don't have an awareness that literally influencers make money based off of creating the most engaging narrative possible in a way that's going to trigger your emotions, if you don't have an awareness of that, then you're in trouble because you're going to get influenced and you're going to get used. And so you've got to figure out what is your narrative, what is authentic to you, what is good to you, right? Like, again, using that example of Netflix, like, I really enjoy TVs and movies. You know, recently I saw Fantastic Four, Superman. I might go to the movies again. Someone like Alex Ramosi might say, oh, the movies are bad, you can use that time to work. It's like, my life. If I like movies and that is living intentionally to me, screw anyone else. Like, that's how I want to live my life. I'd say the only issue is if you're not doing it intentionally, is if you're just being a zombie. It's far better to be the guy that's less successful, that's being intentional about the way that he lives his life, than the guy that is super, super successful and shallow and doesn't know what living intentionally means. And is probably why a lot of people have midlife crises, because they assume that becoming what society believes is successful, or they assume that what society deems as success equals living intentionally, and those are not the same.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people, it's interesting to think about how self-development and mental health kind of works together in a sense.
Yeah.
Because self-development in some sense is this concept of you've never arrived. There's always more you can be doing. You can build more muscle. You can make more money. You can, have a better dating life, whatever it is. But then you're delaying gratification, which is why, in some sense, people that really study self-development can be lonely and depressed. And so I think, again, I really like Chris Williamson as an example of what good mental health is, because he holds space for both. He holds space for, yes, self-development is important, but also self-compassion is equally important as well. And I think, in my opinion, true mental health is when you have both. And more specifically, you're not doing self-development from a place of fear or shame or loneliness. You're doing it from a place of self-compassion and love of, I want what's best for me in my life, and I'll take it as I come along. I'm going to make mistakes along the way and I'll forgive myself for that, but I'm going to self-develop from a place of compassion, not fear and shame.
Yeah. Amen. That's the key. I like what you said about influencers monetizing your loneliness and shame, and that whole feeling of like you're never good enough, and that's how they sell you products. And not just influencers, that's how companies in general monetize.
And
So
now they can do it better than ever because now they have more research and more science, and now they have AI available. So companies and influencers are only going to get better at influencing you.
Yep.
So what are you going to do about it? You need to make sure that you're not living your life based on what someone else told you to do. You're doing it because that's what's authentic to you. And that's not to say that you shouldn't listen to other people and whatnot. It's just to say that everyone has their own narrative. And a lot of people, when they have conversations, they're trying to prescribe their narrative onto you, regardless of whether they're selling you or not. And so I think in today's 21st century, that concept is becoming even more important. And that's why people talk so much today about this idea of authenticity, is because quite candidly and frankly, no one knows what that means, and they don't know what it means at the individual level. And so we're talking around the problems of mental health as opposed to getting to the core and the truth of what the problems with mental health are.
Yeah, that authenticity is essential. I think looking at those three levels, like what's authentic for you, mind, body, and spirit. And that's where there's a fundamental disconnect with what a lot of us are doing.
And sorry to ramble and rant, but I think to bring it back it's to know what those are and to hold yourself accountable to those. If you figured out what's authentic for you for mind, body, and soul, and you're not doing those, then why would you expect you to be happy?
Yeah.
You're not integrated. You're not living in alignment. If you're not living in alignment, of course you're not going to be happy.
Yeah. No, yeah, that is pretty interesting of thinking like the depression, anxiety, like trauma responses and that sort of a deal do come from I haven't thought about it in that perspective before of a disconnect of authenticity in those three areas, mind, body, and spirit. And I think that's what trauma is. It disconnects you from that authentic self. Because like when kids are born,
yes,
kids are free and they're just experiencing life. Something bad happens, and then they're like, oh, I can't be myself anymore. I need to have this new strategy, this new coping mechanism, this new way of being fake, inauthentic, to not have that shitty experience happen again.
That's what makes them depressed.
Right.
Is that then, by definition, they're not living in alignment with their true selves.
Yeah. And I think everyone deals with that to some degree or another. And it's especially difficult if there was a shorter amount of time that people had to experience that authenticity. Because I believe that everyone has, when they're young, you're able to be authentic. And the earlier that's damaged in some way, whether it's trauma or life or whatever happens, it's harder to find that because you're looking for something that you might not even remember ever having, And so that.
I also think too, in addition to that, the only other thing I'd say is people today are talking about this idea that adults don't play. I think it's also about a bit of kind of spontaneity and play in your life. I think that's why the arts can be so empowering. Of learning a musical instrument, we've talked about salsa dancing, like yoga, like I also think doing artsy things can be really great for your mental health because you can feel like a kid again and you can just play. And I think today, and particularly as men, but even beyond that, I feel like today we feel a pressure to do everything with purpose. But who's to say that you need to? I think, yes, you need to live intentionally, but if you're living intentionally all the time, then that's exhausting. And so I think it's doing both of those two things. I think it's about living intentionally and also having the ability to play and relax and have fun. Because to me, that's what the definition of a good life is. It's that you lived it authentically with intention, whatever that means to you, and you were able to play and have fun in the process. You don't want to die on your deathbed having accomplished everything, but then not had any fun along the way. Like in today's like hustle culture of work harder, build more muscle, become more attractive, etc. Like very few people are talking about this idea of just having fun and how important having fun is. Now, there's a difference between having fun and being degenerate, sure, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't have fun and do fun things. And I think it's important to hold space for both of those two, because I think if you take live intentionally to the extreme, you could burn yourself out because you're not letting yourself be a human being and relax and have fun and be spontaneous and be in the moment.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good distinction. I feel like both, it's possible to do both for sure. And potentially having that ability to play and have fun on your radar could be part of your intentionality or your purpose.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So I feel like it's definitely, but yeah, traditionally when people think of intentionality or purpose, it's more of a like decisive stoic, like we're doing it's all very a more heavy sort of feeling as opposed to like a play. But I
It's
agree.
like power versus force.
Yeah, and I agree that play is like also underrated. It's one of those things that has just like quietly been destroyed in a lot of ways for a lot of people. Similar to that idea of the paleo, like what do we need to do that our ancestors did that we're not doing due to how our culture, our society that we're growing up in. And play is one of those things where it's a lot of kids. Imagine the kids. I couldn't imagine growing up in lockdown. Like how shitty would that be? Where you literally cannot play. You're stuck in a house. The best you have is a Zoom screen. That would just suck. Like I luckily was able to a little bit play as a kid and go outside and hang out with other kids, and that's a big way of how you learn and how people learn. And anything useful that I've done or things that I've enjoyed in my life, there's been an element of play there. There's usually like an element of doing things that I'm afraid of or that are like initially scary, and it's the ability to play in that allows me at least to move beyond it to where I'm not just crippled by fear or scared or that sort of a thing.
What's crazy too is this just clicked for me. If mental health is having mind, body, and soul alignment, and your subconscious being aligned with your conscious, and we can talk about that in a sec, of making sure that there's not cognitive dissonance between your subconscious expectations and your conscious reality. But putting that aside, and we can talk about that in a second, think about if that's the definition of what mental health is, what happens when everyone becomes atheists and religion is removed and screens become more addictive than ever? What two things happen? Lack of spirituality and lack of physiology. Lack of physiology because people are hunched over on their screens all day looking at a screen, regardless of whether it's for work or for entertainment. And then religion, well, boom, there's spirituality gone. So if you've just lost 2 of 3 of the pillars, then maybe the reason why people are so big on therapy is because people are forgetting the other 2 and are thinking that mental health is the mind pillar. And to an extent, I believe that it is. But there's these 2 other pillars that I think now we're starting to talk about as a society that I hope become more commonplace. And again, it's not to say that the other stuff or the stuff that's currently live is bad, right? Who am I to say that you should or shouldn't take medication? I'm not a professional. That's not for me to decide. But I think in terms of talking about my own positive experiences, focusing on those three things has helped me the most.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that it's easiest to influence the mind, and it's easiest to sell things of those three, the spirit, the body, and the mind. The mind is the most easy to alter, like through drugs, through chemicals, through whatever, through societal programming. That's the one that most of our culture is focused on, is your mind. You need therapy, you need drugs,
that's why you can take drugs and feel empty sometimes.
Yeah,
I did at one point take anti-anxiety medication, and I still felt empty. Now, granted, you could say that's not the point of drugs. The point of psychiatry is to improve the baseline. Sure, 100%. And maybe that's not the point, but yeah, I did to what you were saying, 100%.
Yeah, and the thing and we're even looking at ways to make the body create products for that, like the whole Ozempic thing, where you can just take a pill that'll change your body. And there's all sorts of crazy like side effects that people are seeing and that sort of a deal. But largely our ability to be authentic is determined by our culture in a certain sense. And in past generations, back in the day, our culture and society was more supportive of the spirit, of the body, of the mind naturally, like without it being like a whole thing. But now we have hypercapitalism, where it's like we can monetize the mind, we can monetize the body, and monetize spirit in a certain sense. And I do think that religion is one access to spirituality, but I don't believe that religion equals in all senses
100%.
spirituality. So there's
100%.
multiple access points. But yeah, that's definitely a component that is missing in all of these. For a lot of people, is that spiritual aspect. I think that might be the most underdeveloped of the three, of the mind, body, and spirit.
Totally.
Is a lot of
because people talk about this idea of cognitive dissonance a lot. There's dissonance between the subconscious and conscious mind. What about if there's dissonance between all three of those pillars, right? There's dissonance with the mind, there's dissonance with the body, there's dissonance with the soul. I would argue that maybe that is more of a framework for mental health. And that, yes, right now, as a society, for the last 50 years, we focused a lot on the mind piece, but we still have room to grow when it comes to the physiology and soul piece and the dissonance there as well, you know?
Yeah, 100%. And that kind of makes me think of that Body Keeps the Score book where, it talks about, your body stores trauma, and that's where a lot of people aren't able to get help, get access, get healing from that, because they're not, like, it's stored in your like your DNA, like your physical self, and there's all sorts of ways to address that. But what people you go to most doctors and say, oh, you're anxious or depressed, go have some drugs. And again, it's like cognitive dissonance.
Which isn't to say that they're not helpful, and which isn't to say that they can be a good place to start and whatnot, but it's to say that's not the only piece of the pie. And so today, I think the way that a lot of society views mental health is take medication, go to therapy. That's it. And to me, there's so much more to that. And I think it's easy for people to say, yes, Jacob, you don't say sleep is important for your mental health. Of course. But then how many people do that in practice? There's a difference between having the awareness of the idea and actually applying it. And so instead of judging these ideas, just test them for yourself and see. And like we've talked about throughout this entire podcast, these values for Ben are going to be different than my values. Okay, maybe sleep isn't the optimal, like, to each their own. But again, just having a journal of mapping out, okay, what's a net positive and what's a positive or net negative trigger for mind, body, and soul for me, and then figuring out how you can do more of the good and less of the bad. is a very practical way for you to improve your mental health. And this is a whole other rabbit hole, but people talk a lot about this concept of teach a man to fish. Duolingo, right? You're learning about languages, but you don't actually become fluent in the language. Is therapy that, right? I don't know, but it's interesting to think about that in the sense that I'm curious for what people say in the comments here, but if therapy actually works, then what would happen to the business of therapy, right? If people don't go for decades and decades long, how does that impact how much money and the capitalism around wellness? And I think that's, to me, like, it's crazy how big the health and wellness space has grown. And this idea that consuming more and more is going to make you more happy. And companies have made trillions of dollars, and the health and wellness market is just booming off of this idea that if you consume this thing, then you're going to feel happy. And yes, it might help. I don't know, to each their own. But I think that's ultimately only up to the individual to decide. And again, everyone has a narrative. Everyone has a goal. Everyone has what's authentic to them. The controversial opinion, the therapist probably wants you to keep talking to you, right? Because they get paid for it and they like having the relationship with you.
Yeah.
That doesn't always equal actually improving your mental health. Again, I'm not saying that therapy is bad. I'm not saying that therapy isn't great for people. I think you should do therapy. I just think that society's viewpoint that therapy and drugs are the only things that people should do in order to improve their mental health, and that we're going to judge people that say, hey, you can also try these things too, authentically, that doesn't feel authentic to me.
No. Yeah, and that's something that I've been thinking about as well. It's that our culture isn't set up to make people happy. It's set up to make them buy things. It's really all about what is the market here, and that's what drives things forward. And I think that's like the lie that a lot of people are told is like, oh, if there's a lot of money in it, it must be making people happy. There must be a reason for it, or it's doing some sort of good. And I don't believe that in a lot of situations, because if there's a financial incentive to make people sick, like if you can make more money making people sick than helping them, people are going to make more people sick. And that's like how I feel like the drug culture is around like pharmaceuticals specifically, is it's a lot easier to treat symptoms than to solve root causes. Or it's easier to say, oh, you have depression, have a pill. Oh, you're fat, take Ozempic. Oh, you have anxiety, take this pill. It's a lot easier to just give people a magic pill than to say, oh, you haven't gone outside in 2 weeks. Oh, you haven't exercised. You have no community. Yeah. You have no sort of spiritual program, like anything like that. Those are, and I don't think it's like necessarily malicious intent. It's just how things are shaking out. But as taking extreme ownership for like our own, not living a doom scrolling life, it is important, and no one's going to give that to you. What's going to be given to you is those surface level fixes. The influencer who's like, oh, you just need to get some goalie gummies. That's going to get your mental health all sorted. Yeah. Get that ashwagandha going. And not that doesn't help, but it's symptomatic as opposed to root cause. And I think boiling it down and looking at root causes is really the key. It really is the key of that mind, body, and spirit. And what has worked? When were people happier? Like what was working? And in shitty conditions, like the way that people died a lot earlier. There wasn't good healthcare. There was a lot worse things back in the day, like early 1900s, 1800s, and any time before. But it really did seem like people, like there definitely weren't as high of overdoses, suicides, all of this like depression and anxiety and those sorts of things. It just wasn't at the scale that it is today. And
what do you think of the phrase that society's problem is they escape their emotions by consuming things as opposed to just integrating their emotions, including the good and the bad.
Yeah, I believe that's a huge part of it. Is it's easier, like that's the easiest. Like people will do the thing that's easiest. Like the convenient
Yeah.
thing is what will be trained. It's because we don't rise to our greatest potential, we fall to our lowest defaults or something
Yeah.
along those lines. And so convenience is often, it's not what's the right thing to do. It's not what's integrity, what's authentic. It's what's the convenient thing to do. And the convenient thing to do is to get something, especially
Yeah.
drugs. And that's why I feel like there's such a huge epidemic of drug, like the whole opioid, fentanyl, and all that is a huge reason. It's literally, it's a quick fix. Like you will get, it is convenient rather than do all this work on yourself. You can take a pill and get completely obliterated. And also, that's why there's all this phone screen addiction and tech addiction and that sort of a thing too. It's like it's way easier to go on your phone and watch some influencer or YouTube video or whatever than to do work on yourself. And so the convenience can actually be it is not a healthy outcome oftentimes doing the convenient thing. And I think back in the day, like doing the convenient thing might have been a healthy thing, or and because if you didn't act quickly, like back in the day, and do and conserve energy, like energy conservation was so much more important when you're like on the run and you don't know when your next meal is going to be. It makes sense. Like you have a point where you can eat a calorie dense meal, do it because you don't know when the next thing's going to come. These days, we have those calorie dense meals easily accessible, and there's no reason to eat a full McDonald's meal or whatever, or eat 12 donuts, but we can. And so I feel like we're not really well equipped to deal with life these days, like our bodies, like spiritually and physically and mentally, we're not equipped to effectively deal with the environment that we're placed in. We're in an
Yeah.
environment like we've never experienced before. That's not even talking about like the AI stuff, but I think internet and social media and phones and screens have
Yeah.
really changed the game in a significant way for people on those mental, physical, body, and spirit levels in a
Yeah.
way. And I believe that that's a big reason why there are such negative reactions, even though we have so much stuff. More doesn't equal better.
Yes.
And the way that it's used in today's world isn't for the betterment of humanity, it's for the betterment of few corporations and shareholders to extract the most wealth that they can out of the people. And especially,
Which isn't to say that they don't have good intentions. It's just to say that, again, everyone has a narrative.
yeah,
Everyone has their own narrative. And so you've got to be aware of that.
100%. So yeah, that's, I guess, maybe like wrapping things up and finding some actionable takeaways. I guess my biggest takeaways are doing that I guess maybe it's journaling, maybe it's being aware, but looking at those three pillars of mind, body, and spirit, and what do I need to do to move things to improve those areas, and what are the things that I'm doing that are negatively affecting those areas. Good example is the sleep thing. Sleep's a big one. I was thinking also like supplements.
Yeah.
I know Chris Williamson loves to talk about blood work and all that sort of a thing. So know your blood work. And I know for me, having ADHD tendencies, there's certain physical supplements that I can take that are actually useful. I'm not trying to sell supplements or whatever, but like I have noticed, I've done the tracking, I've noticed positive outcomes for me taking magnesium and omega 3s and those sorts of things. Like they do help when I do that. And that's a body thing. And it is directly connected to my mind, the body mind connection. When I'm not taking supplements or getting adequate rest, my mind is screwed. So it's not that I need to go to more therapy or that I need some anxiety medication to fix that. It's like, oh, there's some inputs that I'm literally missing from my body that if I put those in, get the fish oil, get the freaking supplements sorted, I will feel better.
Yeah.
I'll have more focus, and now my mind is all sorted. So it's taking those indirect, counterintuitive approaches by looking at the big picture and looking at,
Yeah.
okay, if I'm deficient in these things, that will actually have positive outcomes on my mind. And then for your mind, that you can looking at how the mind is connected to the body and the spirit and seeing where you can address those areas. So if you do for the spiritual aspect, if you're like going to church and that's important to you, great. If you're meditating, that's
Yeah.
also really good. With spirituality, I feel like it's about having a greater sense of meaning or purpose, or that you're serving something greater than yourself in some way. And if being honest with yourself and asking like, am I just serving myself today, or is there a bigger cause, a bigger purpose, a bigger meaning that I am doing something today to serve that, instead of just looking out for my own self-interest? For the mind aspect, yeah, I don't really have as many thoughts on like how to specifically address the mind, mostly because we've just talked about how that's the area that's more oversaturated in terms of solutions, options, and stuff.
I think with the mind, the easiest one is just looking at the differences between your subconscious programming and your conscious living. For me, with mental health, what's helped me is figuring out what would make me proud of myself, and then just making sure that I'm prioritizing those things.
Yeah.
Let's say that fitness and being in great shape is a subconscious value of yours, but you're not living in accordance with that consciously. That's cognitive dissonance. That's going to create negative emotions. And so for the mind, I would just say, look at the differences between the subconscious and conscious and make sure that those are aligned. If it's not a hell yes, it's a no. So if it's not a hell yes for you to be aligned with something subconsciously and consciously, don't do it. Like, you don't want to do something half-assed, because then that's going to create cognitive dissonance between the subconscious and conscious mind. You want to make sure that those are aligned. If there's something that's half-assed or that you're not sure about, just do your best to cut the subconscious programming and just affirm to yourself, you know what, this isn't actually important to me. And that's fine, because I just rather prioritize things that are actually important. You've got to be very honest with yourself about what those things are. You don't want to cope around those ideas, but you want to hold compassion, but also be honest with yourself with those things.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. I think awareness in general, like the mind is kind of like the control center where all these things can happen. Like you said, your values, what are those? What is important? And having your mind work for you instead of against you by with that intentionality. And I guess your mental part of it can map out what do I need to put in place to ensure that I do get sleep? What do I need to put in place to ensure that I am growing in my spiritual capacities? What do I need to put in place to make sure that I'm cutting out the things or removing the things from my life that are negatively impacting my mind, that are negatively impacting my body, that are negatively impacting my spirit?
As a society, we've conditioned ourselves to believe that happens when we accomplish something, as opposed to we can just live in accordance with that in the present moment. In other words, like, I will have spiritual alignment once I have a girlfriend, or I will have body alignment once I'm jacked and have six-pack abs. Or you don't need to accomplish something in order to have alignment, to your point, because people do what's convenient and easy by default, and that's the psychology of people. We assume that if we accomplish something, it will fix that alignment for us, and that's not true. That's a decision we make in the present day. And I think that's why a lot of people get confused why when they accomplish something, it's a fleeting moment of alignment, because your body isn't stupid. And it sounds overwhelming and it's not easy to hear, but it's a present choice we make in the moment. I don't think you need to get this perfect per se, but even just having an awareness that, hey, my mental health isn't just about my mind, goes a long way.
Yeah.
And so making sure that you're prioritizing your physiology and your spirituality in some capacity. And maybe you're just reflecting once a week on a Sunday about the net positives and the net negatives. Do it on a whiteboard or something, and then show that in your bedroom just so that you can very easily see this is what alignment for Jacob or Ben looks like. Like, this is the roadmap of activities and things that I should do and shouldn't do in order to live my best life. That, I think that's the goal, because the self-development industry will sell you on this idea that, oh no, if you're making $100,000 a month, if you're making $100,000 a year, you shouldn't be happy because you should be striving for more.
Yeah.
That's not enough. And it's like, okay, you have a narrative. You're trying to sell me something. You're trying to tap into an emotion of shame to influence me to benefit your narrative. And so it just comes back to living intentionally. Like, everyone has a narrative that they're trying to prescribe to you. There's probably truth to what they're saying to an extent, but just, living intentionally with all of those 3 pillars, I think, is so crucial. It's not easy to do. It's not convenient to do. Take it one step at a time. Be a human about it. Have compassion for yourself. But to me, that's what's helped most with my mental health.
Yeah. Another way to look at it is doing the underrated things, like really prioritizing underrated stuff like sleep, walking, like food, like stuff that is easy to take for granted. But being intentional about it. Community connection with people is a big one as well. Easy to take for granted. And so I like that idea of mapping it all out.
And just starting somewhere too, because it's easy to think, oh shit, I've got to walk an hour a day, or I've got to meditate an hour a day, or I need to go to the gym every single day. Don't go from 0 to 100. Like, to your point, Ben, we do what's convenient for us. So rather than thinking and worrying about how you've got to go from 0 to 100, or how you've got to, okay, now I listened to this podcast and this was really inspiring, and now I'm going to go and do 100 things at once. Rather than doing that, just take really small steps. Your brain is already overwhelmed enough as it is, because there's so much stimulation in society today. So make it as easy for yourself as possible. To your point earlier, it could literally just be as simple as I go outside.
Yep.
It could be as simple as I walk for 5 minutes. It could be as simple as I set a 3-minute timer on my phone and do nothing. It could be anything, but start small and don't overwhelm yourself, because it's easy. This might make sense to listeners, and then they're excited, and then they feel like they have this epiphany, and then they go off and try and do a gazillion things at once. When has that ever worked? It's never worked for me.
Yeah.
So just, okay, so now you know that, okay, mind, body, and soul alignment is what's key to my mental health. I want to record things that make me more positive in those areas and more negative in those areas, and I'm going to try and do more of the positive. I hate to break it to you, but this is something that you're going to do for the rest of your life, hopefully. So you feeling like you need to do everything all at once today it's not necessary, and it's frankly very counterproductive. If you can do that, great, but I can't, and most people can't, because we're human. So all I'd say is, I found a lot of fulfillment and excitement from this conversation, and I'm excited to action on it. But we shouldn't overwhelm ourselves in the process, because this is an ongoing life pursuit, and that's why you have a podcast on this, Ben, because it's not a one and done deal.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I like your recap there. It's the 3 pillars: mind, body, and soul. Those are the 3 things that they're all interconnected. And when you press on one thing, it affects the other 2. As you're going about life, as things are happening, as you have wins, you have losses, you have upsets, ups and downs. Seeing like how those are connected and noting that is key, and tracking those positives and negatives. So even as it's just coming up, you don't need to go, I need to find the key to my mind, body, and soul and write it all down and do it in a day. It's an ongoing process of awareness.
Do you think that's what a good therapist does?
I don't think they're conscious of the body and soul aspect as much. But I think ideally, yeah,
Ideally,
like
they're like noting the patterns, and
the best therapist would be showing, like, just hypothetically, like what, based on what we've talked about in our own experience, like the best prescription for mental health is someone who is
Mm.
like your quarterback of mental health. What they would be doing is they would be looking at those areas for you, or helping you see those areas for yourself, because
Yes,
that's the key thing, is blind spots, and asking questions to get you to be like, how are you happy physically, like, and getting,
yeah,
and a lot of it is like having conversations and going down that path of, oh yeah, I feel tired, like I feel lethargic, I think I'm depressed or something, and it's like, when was the last time you worked out? It's like, oh, it's been months. It's like, oh,
yeah.
and seeing those connections. So I feel like the best mental health leader or assistant or mentor would be looking at those areas, showing,
Mm.
helping you see the connections between those areas, and then actually saying, what are you going to do about it? And maybe helping you stay accountable and pointing you in the
Mm.
right direction and challenging you. That's one thing that I benefit from, is like when I get challenged or someone calls me out on something. That is more motivating than just like some insights. Like I have,
What do you think of the phrase "you can't have your cake and eat it too" when it comes to mental health, in the sense that decisions have trade-offs and opportunity costs are a real thing, in the sense that yes, ice cream can be authentic,
mhm.
but then being jacked is authentic at the same time. If someone, theoretically, if someone does this exercise, they might try and make it like too perfect and not human, and to play devil's advocate here, be like too entitled with it, because they want to have their cake and eat it too. Like they want to have the best of everything and not the worst of things, and then this becomes another way for you to just avoid bad emotions. Like, how should people think about trade-offs when it comes to these three pillars?
Triage is what comes to mind for me, and triage being when you're sick, you treat the person who's like bleeding out of their neck versus the person who stubbed their toe in a
Mm,
medical setting. It's
yeah,
like the neck wound is going to kill you way faster than like upset about a toe. I would
yeah.
prioritize, and that's a more complicated way of saying prioritizing things, but I think that idea of, there's some
Mm,
very messed up areas or bleeding areas in your life, whether you're aware of them or not, and not to be an influencer or whatever, but it's, I think everyone has those areas that are on fire. And the first thing is
yeah.
becoming aware that they actually are on fire, whether that's physical health, mental health, or your spiritual health, and just having awareness. And maybe just identifying what aspect is most on fire. And it could be something negative that you're doing. Like maybe you are eating like 10,000 calories every day and it's just really
Yeah,
messing you up. You're getting fat. Maybe you have a really, maybe you have like an addiction or something. Like if you're on a drug and you're like crippled by an addiction, that's probably the thing that's on fire, and that's going to be the thing. You don't want to be thinking
yeah,
about like, oh, I need more time outside. It's like, put down the fucking crack pipe and get some help or
yeah,
whatever it might be.
yeah.
So that's kind of what I would look at it, is where's the thing that's most on fire, and be honest about it. And if you can't be honest about it, like talk to other people and maybe ask them what
Which
they.
is interesting, because then then the takeaway from our conversation is not just figure out what's positive and negative for those three pillars of mind, body, soul.
Mhm.
It's also prioritize them and create a priority list in each pillar.
Yeah,
Meaning, okay, for body, like maybe that is sleep, and sleep is the number one priority for you, right?
yeah,
And that's the North Star, and all else equal, that's the one thing. And then for mind, maybe that's the thing of, okay, I want mental stimulation and I want to feel smarter. And so I'm going to read books. Or for spiritual, maybe that's I go on a walk outside, or I'm barefoot, touch grass. Like maybe, so it's not just, maybe that's like the advanced level of this. Like step one is just start to figure out the negatives and positives for each of those pillars. And then step 2 is almost create prioritization with those. Granted, maybe that's overcomplicating it, and maybe that's like just making this too nerdy. But I think it's interesting because what's authentic for me is eating ice cream and trying to look good physically. And again, that concept of you can't have your cake and eat it too. And so if being in great shape is the bigger priority, at least in 2025, before they're going to merge, these two worlds of physical health and convenience together and whatnot, I'm going to prioritize being in better shape over the ice cream. I'm not going to do no ice cream because it's still authentic, but I'm going to prioritize my physique more than that.
Yeah, and I don't think perfection's the goal is just awareness, and the way you get to awareness is tracking it. So it's like that you eat like a pound of ice cream, you just say, after eating that pound of ice cream, where do I feel, or is this helping me? And you might not even know after you do it. Maybe it's like after you check the scale in a week and you've noticed you've gained 10 pounds or something. Is this aligned with what I'm doing? And it's not about like success or failure. It's just about, like I said, awareness. And that awareness and the meaning of that, if you gain 10 pounds, you eat the ice cream, is all up to you. There's not, this is the one right way. It's what is actually important. And that can only come from your own awareness and being in touch with yourself and being able to track those wins. I don't even like the idea of calling it a win, but the idea is where you see authenticity or alignment, or you feel something greater within you, and you're like, wow, this was meaningful. I'm really glad I did that thing. Tracking that, and that's a good positive indicator. And then when you have backslides or situations where you're like, dang, that really was not the right thing, and I want to minimize that as much as possible, tracking those things, and then you can see where things start stacking up for you.
I think the tracking piece of this is crucial too, because I don't think you want to be too robotic about this, and that's why I hesitate at the idea that AI would do this for you, because that wouldn't feel spiritual. But maybe if you figure out like what's the one thing for each of these pillars that you want to prioritize, then using some sort of habit tracker like the Strides app from the App Store on iOS on like your iPhone, to just track, did I do that thing every single day? Because then you're starting to associate, living intentionally with habits and whatnot, and tying that into your mental health. And then you can say, I don't feel good today. What's the reason? I didn't check off the habit today.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the reason why,
Totally. Yeah, and if it's not being tracked, you won't have awareness of it. And it sounds like a tedious thing, and it is the key to unlocking those areas, the mind, body, and spirit. If it's not being tracked, you can't systematize it if you don't know, because I look at it as building your own recipe. What is your own unique recipe for mental health? Everyone has their own unique blueprint. That's why I don't believe that there's any one prescription that works for everyone. But the more that you gather those positives or negatives, those are ingredients. And you can be like, this ingredient fucking sucks. I'm not going to use that anymore. No more eating a pound of ice cream at 1 a.m. in the morning.
Oh, no.
Or maybe it does work. Maybe it's like, I feel so good. I feel so rested after this pound of ice cream. I slept like it. Whatever it is. You gather the ingredients, and then you're like, okay, here's what works, here's what doesn't work. And each day you're making a new dish for yourself, mental health wise and spiritually. And so it's being intentional about it. And some people, that's why I go back to what works, what used to work versus where we find ourselves today in this hyper capitalist, miserable society. And that's not even an exaggeration. It's a fucking truth. People are miserable, or a lot of people are. And that's why intentionality is key, because you literally have to be outside of the treadmill of society. To a certain extent, you have to carve your own path. Otherwise, you will follow the predictable results that other people, addiction, isolation, depression, anxiety, all this crap. and it's not your fault. Like people love to shit on Gen Z and like the younger generations. They're like, oh, they're all anxious, they're all depressed, they're a whole bunch of fucking snowflakes. It's like they're growing up in in the shittiest mental health time in history, and so it's I feel like that's where the intentionality comes from. And so
Mm.
what do you do is you track what is true for you, what is authentic, what is not authentic, and then you start to build from there of what is actually important. And then you can
Yeah.
start to experience, instead of FOMO, you can experience JOMO, the joy of missing out, instead of the fear of
Ah,
missing out.
you went
And
there. Went there.
I've been sitting on that one for a bit. And
Off.
it really is key because that's what manipulates you. That's where the control comes
Yeah.
in, is the FOMO. Oh, what if you
Yeah.
don't get the six pack? What if you don't eat the gummy that's going to change your life? Oh, what if you don't buy the punching bag that's used by fucking Manny Pacquiao or whatever? Like all that's FOMO. It's all FOMO, and
Yeah.
that's the control aspect that
Yeah.
people use to put their agenda into your brain.
Yeah.
But if you're able to cultivate the joy of missing out, the JOMO, where you're like, fuck
Yeah.
it, I don't need a fucking Manny
Yeah.
Pacquiao punching bag. Like, I know what I want. And
Yeah.
so you're building your own castle in a certain sense, because otherwise, fucking Instagram, the influencers, they're all like barging into your house, like, hey, you got to get this shit. You got to get this thing. Literally, they're
Yeah.
already in your house on your fucking phone right now. All of those competing interests. And so that, to me, is what I've realized recently, is cultivating that discipline of saying, I'm literally going to cut out these things intentionally out of my life. I am going to miss out, and I'm going to be happy about missing out on these things because I know where the intention that is authentic to me lies. I know what is important to me, and I don't need someone to tell me what it is. I don't need the news. I don't need an influencer. I don't need Chris Williamson to tell me what that is for me. Yeah, I can choose
Yeah.
to listen to these things if it is aligned. If it's not aligned, I am going to be putting barriers, putting blocks, because
Yeah. I think, this notion that as humans will have no fear might be ambitious, but maybe do you think that's maybe why society is struggling with mental health a bit? Is they're focusing on every narrative is about FOMO rather than JOMO, in the sense that like everything is about, okay, the fear of if I don't go to therapy is that my mental health is going to decline. The fear that if I don't invest into this 997 program to make $10,000 a month is that I'm not going to make $10,000 a month. Do you think it's as a society, maybe also we've become like too good at weaponizing FOMO to the extent that we're all just living in fear and none of us are living with this notion of JOMO of, if I don't do these things that bring me joy, I will miss out. But I'm doing that from a place of compassion, not from a place of fear. Because if I keep operating with a fear mentality, it's going to create more fear. If I operate from a place of joy, it's going to create more joy.
yeah. No, I like the question. The question is, are we like overly weaponizing fear, and is joy and choosing to miss out like underrepresented? Like 100%. That's what motivates people. Like most people we're motivated by survival, and there's all of the research is that, I don't know, it takes so many more positive experiences to compensate for a negative
Yeah.
experience. Like you could have night.
Yeah.
This isn't a stat, but for me, it feels like 99 positive things can happen. The one negative thing is the one thing that I think about, and that's just how we're
Yeah.
wired. And again, like it just naturally, this is where my brain goes. Is that I keep going back to that old school mental or paleo mental health is what I keep thinking about. Is we're not built for this environment that we're put in. Like our brains are seeing like the saber-toothed tiger, like the threats around every corner, and that's what in the doom scrolling and the headlines and the clickbait.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
it's like everywhere our brains are perceiving life-threatening attacks on us that aren't actually happening, but it feels like it. So when we see like the crazy headline, oh, earthquake in Russia, oh, bombing in the Middle East, oh, another layoff at Microsoft or whatever it is, It's like there's a lion attack on the village every second of every day that we're like plugged into the media or social media or whatever. And that didn't happen. It's like you had your one lion attack, maybe, or whatever it was. You'd have your scary
Yeah.
thing. You'd freak out. You'd dump cortisol. It would, but then it would stabilize. Life would go back to normal. You'd be able to chill. You'd be able to talk with the other people in the community or whatever. You'd, I don't know, do your farming, do whatever it is you did, and you'd be fucking left alone. Normally, unless you're like in some war, there'd be the scary thing that happened. That would be the thing. People would talk about it, and then you'd go back to a normal baseline. But it's like we don't have a normal baseline. We have this fucking insane like attack on like our brains, on our perceptions, on that on a daily basis. And so I think weaponized fear is a good way of putting it. And we're not, our brains are not, we're not adapted. We didn't evolve from phones. We didn't evolve from social media. This is all new shit that our old monkey brains cannot deal with. And so that's, I think, a huge reason why there's so much depression, there's so much anxiety, there's higher suicide rates, there's addiction, there's all these things, because it's like we're like poisoning ourselves with all this access, and we're not, it's like there honestly like needs to be like a license, I feel, or some sort of training or some sort of ability, but we just have it. It's all just there. If you have an internet connection, you have all this shit in front of you, and most kids have it too. And then you have all these kids killing themselves, like higher rates of kid suicide rates. It's not that people are more messed up. It's that the environment that people find themselves in is more terrifying than it used to be, even though objectively on the outside it's more safe and stable, but our brains aren't able to make that connection because we're getting like set off as if we're experiencing a lion attack like every couple seconds or every time we're like looking at social media.
It's an interesting concept because basically any major company you can think of, like Meta, Duolingo, Netflix, all of these companies have mastered getting your attention.
Yeah.
And so I think maybe part of the issue is you're so trained. This is going to sound woo-woo and annoying, but bear with me. You're basically trained to give attention to everyone else but yourself.
Yeah.
You're trained to give attention to Netflix, to TikTok, to whatever the big thing on your screen is, that you're not giving yourself enough time, enough grace, enough attention to actually figure out what is intentional for you for mind, body, and soul. And so the homework of this video is just do yourself the favor of figuring out what that is.
Yeah. 100%. We got to jump to another call.
Yeah.
But yeah, that if I say any more, I'll keep talking too much, but we'll just wrap it there.
Me too.
I think there's a lot of good, a lot of great takeaways, and hopefully this is useful. So yeah, we'll see you in the next one.